Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Perlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Perlman.
Hello. We're going to be talking about carbon dioxide in our air, about climate change, and about solutions to solving this critical problem. My guests are Christoph Gebald. He is co-CEO and co-founder of Climeworks, and Claude Letourneau, who is president and CEO of Savante. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Very nice meeting you.
Hi, Nancy. Nice to meet you.
Your companies are working in a partnership to solve some of our Earth's most critical problems. And before we talk about your solutions like carbon capture and storage and carbon dioxide removal, let's begin with what the problem is that you're trying to solve. Christoph, your company is based in Zurich, Switzerland, and Claude, your company is based in Canada, in British Columbia, but you have plants in Iceland. Christoph, what is the major issue that you have decided to deal with?
Big why we are chasing is really to reverse climate change. As of 2021, it is absolutely clear that we have to take out enormous amounts of carbon dioxide from the air in order to stop climate change and even reverse climate change. Like 3 years ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the Climate Council, so to say, made clear that in order to achieve our climate targets, we have to remove enormous quantities of CO2 from the air and permanently remove it. So, for example, by storing it underground. The reason we have to do that is because we have already emitted too much in the past. We have to remove CO2 from the air and take back historic emissions to establish a healthy balance of CO2 in the atmosphere.
Claude, your company also is trying to solve this climate change issue?
Absolutely, and we're quite complementary to Climeworks in the sense that we're trying to avoid having CO2 going in the atmosphere in the first place by removing the CO2 that is emitted by hard-to-abate industries such as cement factories.
And your company is named after an 18th century scientist?
Yeah, we decided to have a name that would have a long-term branding, and Svante Arrhenius was one of the first scientists who basically saw the correlation between CO2 in the atmosphere and the temperature increase of Earth, and he was one of the Nobel Prize in doing so. So we're trying to solve here, Climeworks and ourselves, Svante, a very old problem, but with the intensity of addressing the sense of urgency of not emitting CO2 in the atmosphere and removing the CO2 that's been emitted for the last 100 years.
Does Climeworks have any special meaning?
Indeed, it does. It goes back to the two founders of Climeworks, Jan and myself. We are avid mountaineers, and we spent quite some time during our studies in Chamonix. It's a mecca for alpinism in the Alps. When we lived there, we could really feel the melting of the glaciers. In the alpine landscape, you can feel climate change much faster than in other environments. In that context, we were inspired to start our company, and we were looking for a company name. We both were also in need of ski boots, and we found a store called Footworks, and we found that name really inspiring and made Climeworks out of it.
As a mountain climber myself, I have seen the receding glaciers, and Switzerland, of course, has an historic record, photographic record of how they have receded. But this is happening all over the world. In the United States, the glaciers in Glacier National Park, Canada, everywhere. The climate has certainly destroyed the high mountain places, have destroyed our rainforests, have destroyed our oceans. So why have you chosen to build a factory plant in Iceland?
Yeah, precisely for that reason. Where we are coming from is saying that humanity has been very good at building technology. Humanity has failed at stopping cutting trees, for example, right? As of 2021, we still see people are cutting trees and rainforests, but people are very good at building machines. And in such, we very soon said, hey, we have to come up with a technology piece that is capable of solving one of humanity's biggest issues, and that is climate change. And in such innovations at university led us to a concept that enabled us to remove CO2 from the air with a machine. And the second piece we needed once we were capable of removing CO2 from the air with a machine was a place where we can store it permanently. And we found that place in Iceland together with partners in Iceland. They're called Carbfix. They are experts for storing CO2 permanently underground.
But don't you also have a commercial scale carbon capture operation at a cement plant?
So Svante is taking emission coming from factories and trying to eliminate the CO2 going in the atmosphere. And Climeworks is taking the CO2 we have in the atmosphere and trying to remove it. So we have a plant at the Lafarge-Olsum cement factory that is running as well, so we can demonstrate the efficiency of removing it from what we call flue gas, containing CO2 at the concentration of about 16% CO2.
Iceland is using renewable energy sources and has innovative environmental plans. But these issues of the carbon dioxide in our atmosphere are being caused by industrial nations like the United States of America. We need what you seem to be doing, capturing the pollutants, removing the pollutants from the air here in the United States. Do we need better governmental policies than we have had in the last few years? I know that you have been in negotiations for a direct air capture research and development funding by our United States Department of Energy. Do you think with our new administration that will happen?
If you look at the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, 2/3 are coming from Europe and North America. But when you look today at the amount of CO2 that is being emitted every year, it's shifting now toward more India and China because there's more manufacturing activities taking place. It's a matter of balancing out the inventory of CO2 in the atmosphere versus the new CO2 being emitted. Definitely Europe and North America have a key role to play, and the work we are doing in the United States, Svante is targeting cement factory primarily and hydrogen production, where we're trying to remove the CO2 going in the atmosphere in the first place. The United States today, regardless of its public policy, have been quite active in supporting the technology development of CO2 capture or removal technologies. There is two types of mechanism today to treat CO2 from a monetization point of view. There's a low carbon fuel standard that gives about $150 per ton for anyone who wants to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. And there is a tax credit called 45Q, where the U.S. government would give a company capturing and storing CO2 about $50 per ton from point source.
From the Climeworks perspective, for capturing CO2 from the air, the location actually does not matter too much because CO2 emissions in the air, in the atmosphere, mix on a quite fast scale, meaning that, for example, emissions from industrialized nations are reaching other parts of the world within days or weeks. Hence, if you're drawing CO2 at a remote location from the air and storing that underground, you could also address emissions that have been emitted elsewhere. For example, unavoidable emissions due to agriculture or due to some activities you simply can't avoid. They don't need to be tackled at the source, but can be tackled at a location remote. We are currently doing that in Iceland. Iceland is a very beautiful place for doing that because of two reasons. A, we have access to abundant renewable energy that keeps the resulting emissions from our operations very low. B, it has excellent geology in order to permanently store CO2 underground. Again, due to this degree of freedom for removing CO2 from the air, we can place direct air capture plants wherever there are good conditions. And good conditions could also be policy instruments, and we are seeing a lot of them in the United States. We perceive the United States as rather progressive and rather friendly toward what we're doing.
I want to have a clean earth, one where we're not polluting, and I'm pleased that there are companies like yours that have developed technology to solve some of our serious problems caused by older technologies. I don't understand how it all works. Fortunately, you have a lot of wonderful information on both of your websites that explain the process. Are you able to briefly summarize how your systems work and where people can go for more detail?
The excitement about what Climeworks does and what we do is we're using fundamentally a similar ingredient to make the capture or the removal of CO2. It's called nanomaterials. It's a unique material that can catch and release the CO2 very effectively so that we can separate the CO2 from nitrogen, what you see in the atmosphere, and or nitrogen that you see in the cement flue gas composition. So that powder or nanomaterial is engineered, and we are able to put it into a different form. In our case at Svante, we use a unique filter that can catch and release that CO2 in minutes and allows us to have an effective way of engineering solution to either remove the CO2 from the air or remove it from a flue gas.
And how does the large-scale carbon dioxide removal plant actually operate?
Very fundamentally, the carbon removal from the atmosphere functions as follows. You have one piece, like the machine on the surface that is capturing the CO2 from the air. The fundamental, very simple principle this device works with is that CO2 is an acid. What we build is sort of a base, and we all learned in school that acid and bases like each other and attract each other. What we have is this device with a solid base in there, and that could be, for example, filter materials developed jointly by Svante and Climeworks. They're great synergies, and this material is then on its surface capturing the CO2, and after some time the material is fully saturated with CO2, and then we can drive it off this filter by simply heating it to the boiling point of water, 100 degrees Celsius, 270 Fahrenheit. By that, we obtain a pure gas, like really a high purity gas. It's so pure, we're even using it for beverage carbonation, like the Coca-Cola company, for example, is using that in the beverage operations. And this high purity CO2 gas, we are then putting into the ground, where it's stored permanently and safely for millions of years. And in such, we're actually reducing CO2 from the atmosphere in a permanent way, and that is how the carbon removal operations do function. For those who are looking to learn more about that, I would recommend them to visit climeworks.com. We have a lot of peer-reviewed studies. We developed our technology during our PhD studies at uni. And also for storing the CO2 underground, there's a lot of information that can be found from our partners Carbfix.
How many other companies are doing what you're doing? Is this unique? Is this similar to other solutions of tackling this carbon dioxide issue and carbon capture issue?
For the field of capturing CO2 from the air, globally a handful of companies do exist. Out of them, 2 companies are roughly the same size, a company called Carbon Engineering and us. The other companies are a little smaller size.
And in the case of Svante, there is an existing technology called first generation that is using a liquid-based solution to capture CO2 from flue gas. Those are made by very large companies like Mitsubishi or Shell. So they are very expensive in capital cost. So what Svante offers is half of the capital costs with our second generation solid sorbent system, and opening up the application to apply this thing in modular and smaller size plant, such as what you will see on the cement factory or hydrogen factory, where liquid systems today are being deployed in limited amount of cases, but on very large coal power plants or gas power plants.
Scientists say that we are almost past the point of being able to stop the massive destruction on this planet, the extinction, because of the excess pollutants in the air, the climate change problem. Do you think that we are going to be able to solve it in time?
In my mind, this is no more a technology issue. It is one of willingness for society to pay the price of managing CO2 at a price point that I believe society can afford in the $100 to $150 per ton. We can today deploy our technology both from Climeworks and Svante. Magnitude of that industry in putting back the carbon where it came from in the first place, which is down under, would be the size of the oil and gas industry today. So if you were to capture the equivalent of 10 gigaton The world emits 40 gigaton today worldwide, and you take 10 gigaton and you apply the cost of doing this, it is the same value as the oil and gas industry today in reverse. Mind-boggling, but it is feasible.
I'm so pleased that your companies are leading the way in trying to tackle this critical issue. Thank you so very much for your good work. Thank you for being my guest.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I have been speaking with Christoph Gebald, who is co-CEO and co-founder of Climeworks, and with Claude Letourneau, who is president and CEO of Svante. I'm Nancy Pearlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Pearlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.